On Monday, July 13, Blue Frontier and the Center for the Blue Economy released the Ocean Climate Action Plan. This final report is the result of 16 months of work by over 800 people, including a diverse range of ocean and coastal stakeholders. On today's Rising Tide, I'm talking with two of my key colleagues in this ongoing effort to create a Blue New Deal for the United States and our blue marble planet. Today I'm talking with Jason Scorse, Director of the Center for the Blue Economy at Middlebury Institute for International Studies in Monterey and Blue Frontier's partner in the Ocean Climate Action Plan, and also Charley Peebler, who's the 16-year-old founder of Heirs to Our Ocean, an activist youth group. She specializes in corals and deep seas and derelict fishing gear, and is also a leader of our Youth Advisory Council for the Ocean Climate Action Plan, aka Blue New Deal. Maybe we can just start with Jason, with kind of what inspired us to start rolling this out 16 months ago with an article we did in Manga Bay, which is an online conservation science outlet. But I think for me, and probably you too, is Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey put out the Green New Deal, which looked great, but...
Yeah, right. But as many people in the ocean world know, it was very lacking in ocean focus. In fact, it barely mentioned the oceans at all. And so that was the impetus for you and I, David, to kind of try to rustle together this national coalition to make sure that ocean climate policy was front and center when climate policy was, going to rise up in the ranks of priorities and hit the U.S. Congress. And so that's what we've been busy doing. And we're really happy with the report. Charley contributed a lot to, and her colleagues, and many others around the country.
Yeah, I think, and again, there was more connection, I believe, with youth at that time than, say, the formal ocean community and network of ocean conservation groups. But youth was recognized in climate threat early. There was the student strikes of 2019. And as a ocean-oriented youth group, Heirs to the Ocean was doing some of that work as well.
Yeah, we were. We definitely attended a lot of the climate strikes, and it was really incredible to see youth come together for this global movement. And I'm actually really happy to see the involvement in youth in OCAP as well. It's super great that we're getting our voice out for the futures.
The physical nature of the oceans literally being changed in our lifetimes by climate in terms of its circulation, its chemistry, its temperature, and its color. So, what's frustrating to me is we know a lot of the solutions. It's creating the political will to enact them. But even, Jason, even with solutions, though, we sort of know them, but it takes people in the fields, in the specific sectors of ocean activity and blue economy to really start drilling down on what those solutions might be.
Yeah, so let me just say 2 points on that. First, I want to give another shout out to the youth in this, both, the heirs and other youth activist groups, because I really think this is a historical moment where the adults are following the youth and not the other way around. And I've been in this movement for climate change for 25 plus years, and the rapid acceleration of things that were unheard of, decarbonized by 2050 was not ever mentioned in the Obama administration. It was unheard of even 5 years ago. And now that's the language, that's the baseline. And I really think it's because of the youth activists putting it front and center, not being cowed by what's politically salient or what compromises need to be made with industry, but saying this is what needs to be done. And, so it's an honor to to help do the policy work, to help fill in those blanks and make it a reality. And so to your question, it's worth taking a moment to say the Democrats came out with their big report, Solving the Climate Crisis, a little over a week ago, which is an outstanding report. I think all Democrats, all Americans should be proud of it because it's a really serious attempt to unify all the key pieces: environmental justice, industry, labor rights, and it has a big ocean component. They took their cues, they got the criticism, and it has a big ocean component, but there's a number of pieces that are missing that I think OCAP will help fill in because we probably did the deepest dive, so to speak, in the real policy details. And I think I see our work as really complementary to the larger democratic efforts.
We sort of had four areas that we broke it down to: coastal infrastructure and financing, offshore renewable energy, ports, shipping, and the maritime sector, and then fishing, aquaculture, marine conservation, diversity. I mean, I go back to how did change happen, the big environmental keystone laws of the 1970s. And you look at something like the Clean Air Act, and it was this coalition of the steel workers and the public health community and the environmentalists, and getting these unique coalitions, when it's money versus people, you have to have like broad coalitions of people to get that balance over. And I think we're beginning to do that on this Blue Coalition around this Blue New Deal.
Charley, maybe you want to speak about your coalition, your crew?
Yeah, sure. So when we first were able to speak at the October event for the Ocean Climate Action Plan at the Middlebury Institute in Monterey, I was really motivated because there was this group of just like 60 to 70 people who were basically hanging on to our every word. I and another heir, Aaliyah, were able to speak. And it felt incredible to know that there was the intergenerational relationship like that in this plan. And I think it's definitely to the point you were bringing up, David, earlier about how youth are seen as something for the future and not as something for the present. I think that's definitely something that wasn't realized up until recently, really, is that youth should be fighting for our futures now and not in the future. And that's what I like about OCAP so much, is how intergenerational it is, because oftentimes youth aren't seen as credible. And it's incredible to see that we can bring this legislative piece and this youth passion piece and put it together to create OCAP.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that was a great event back in the days when people met face to face in open spaces, and and delicious, Mexican vegan tacos, and people who've come from street activism meeting, like the state controller Yi, who actually has like 700 billion in pension funds under her control, and talked about using that leverage to get the financial sector to move away from fossil fuels and invest in renewables. And so when we talk about an offshore wind industry, or investing in restoring coastal habitats, we're talking with people who actually have the resources or can mobilize the resources to shift capital, to shift investment in those directions. And that's sort of the specialty, I guess, of the Center for the Blue Economy, if you want to talk a little about funding and investing in a healthy ocean.
Sure. First, Charley, you're a good poster child for reducing the voting age to 16. So then, we should get that one on the ballot. So in terms of two things on the financial side, one that's an international component of the Ocean Climate Action Plan. So we have a recommendation in there that the U.S. should sign on to kind of the new blue economy financing principles, and these have been the World Bank, IMF, and the EU have been really at the forefront of this. But these are some really nice, simple, clear principles to help funnel investment into things that are truly sustainable and climate-friendly development. Because for too long, finance has just gone wherever the money's the best, or wherever the first developers that come knocking. And so these principles will help kind of funnel finance in the right directions. The next point is a little counterintuitive, which is that, and this kind of comes back to my kind of critique of the Democrats' plan, is that a lot of the blockages right now, a lot of the bottlenecks in the blue economy in the United States are not primarily economic. They're more informational, they're more regulatory, they're more permitting. So right now, for example, offshore wind is economic in almost everywhere in the country. What's stopping offshore wind is not a lack of tax credits. It's the fact that they can't get the federal leases from the government in a quick fashion. They can't make plans. They don't know where they're allowed to expand, where they're about to go. They don't see a plan for a national grid and for transmission cables. So, tax credits are great. Give offshore wind tax credits, but that's actually not going to be the thing that's going to scale offshore wind. And so, interestingly, as an economics think tank, we actually kind of found a lot of things that aren't directly related to money that are really the bottlenecks here. And I think that's one of the surprising aspects that really comes across in the OCAP report.
And interestingly, also another example being, living shorelines, the green infrastructure, in our case, blue infrastructure, restoring coastal marshes and salt marshes and wetlands and dunes. And again, this is an example where it's already been shown to be more cost effective. And so the issue really isn't the financing, the issue is the education. People are used to rock walls and revetments. They're used to hard gray infrastructure. And so one of our suggestions that isn't in the congressional plan but should be is take the Army Corps of Engineers and begin building or supporting model living shoreline projects across the nation, and set up a national database that developers and property owners and others can look at to see what works, because what works is fantastic. I believe you said triple bottom line, a win-win-win. It's good for the environment. It's aesthetically way more pleasing than hard structures, and it's more cost effective. They've here in San Francisco Bay, they found that it would cost 3 times as much to keep San Francisco Airport from being inundated by sea rise if you put in walls than if you extended natural salt marshes and eelgrass beds around it that are already there, and they just need to be expanded.
I think that's a fantastic point, especially because there's not one solution. It's not just a man-made solution or an eco-oriented solution. We need both, really. There's a lot of debate in the conservation community about what we should be doing to fight these crises. But in reality, all of it is pretty much a viable solution. We need to be working towards multiple areas of focus to solve these issues. And that's something that Heirs to Our Oceans is trying to push through, is showing that youth can be involved in legislative work, in restoration work, in education work. Like, all of these different branches need to be tied together at some point, because just like our Earth's ecosystems, it really is all interconnected.
They always tried to say, well, it's like environment versus jobs. And the reality when you live someplace like California is, with great environmental standards come great jobs. So offshore, I've been on BP deep drilling platforms. I've been on out with the roughnecks and the roustabouts on offshore drilling platforms. And it kind of feels like I'm on a whaling ship in the 1850s. This is a great part of our maritime history, but it's time to leave. It's time to leave the historic stage. And the great thing with offshore wind is all these guys on the drilling platform, all these guys on the well deck, the roughnecks, the roustabouts, they have the skills that are really easily transferable. They can all be offshore wind technicians and engineers. They're already in the offshore environment. I mean, it's going to be harder to train coal miners to be solar operators than it is for the offshore industry to just transition laterally from oil to wind. And the great advantage among many is, it's not a disaster when you have a wind spill.
A lot of these renewable energy sources are actually just better for the environment in general, with how they're placed and how they're implemented as well. So that's a really good point, there's not any drawbacks, pretty much.
So we're kind of wonking out here, which is great because we've just released this Ocean Climate Action Plan, and people can find it online, go to the Center for a Blue Economy or a Blue Frontier. And hopefully Heirs for the Ocean will have the link as well to the final report. But, we're all doing it because we love the ocean. So I saw a great picture of your sister, Dakota, like bent over like a pretzel while snorkeling. How'd you get into the ocean? We'll sort of do a quick roundtable on how we got to love our ocean.
Sure. Okay. when I was very small, about 5 years old, I had this movie that went through the alphabet with ocean animals. And I fell in love with the parrotfish because I got to learn about the fact of its disgusting mucus bubble. And 5-year-old me thought that was hilarious. And so I got really into coral reefs as well. And that's where my passion for coral started, was the parrotfish.
And just to be clear, because I've seen it, puts basically a spit or mucus bubble around itself at night.
Yep.
So that if a predator approaches and pops it, it has that fraction of a second to escape.
Yeah. It's quite disgusting and fascinating, in my opinion. Yeah, so I was into coral reefs, and I was at the aquarium one day, and I was in front of a giant Pacific octopus tank.
Oh.
And there's always that one occasion that you'll see a giant Pacific octopus do kind of a dance. And I started to experience this octopus dance throughout my lifetime when I was 11 at the San Diego Aquarium, more recently when I was 13 in the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And I was just fascinated by these animals. And so when I finally got to see a real life red octopus at the tide pools in Pillar Point, I was just like blown away. It was an incredible experience. And that was the same year that we started Heirs to Our Oceans.
Wow. So you've gone beyond the tide pools now. You're now a diver.
Yeah. We got dive certified, and I was free diving one day, and I got to see an octopus in a reef, and it just rekindled that fire for me right in that moment.
Okay. Before we go on, I'm going to circle back to the parrotfish, because aside from looking gorgeous and multi-hued rainbow fishes, it's not just their disgusting spit bubbles, mucus bubbles that get to me, but the fact that some of the most beautiful white sand beaches you find in the Caribbean are basically parrotfish poop. I mean, they eat the algae on the coral, but they take in a lot of the coral. So basically, they eat coral and poot sand. And
pretty much
in the life of a parrotfish, if it gets to live a full, productive 20-year life, it will eat and poot about 50 square yards of sand. So
yeah,
they're the sand builders of the reefs.
That interesting fact is one of the reasons that they're keystone species, is because they eat the algae off of coral and help coral reefs stay sustained, pretty much, because algae can overgrow coral when it's stressed, and then there's no more reef. It's just algae at that point. And so having parrotfish around is a great way to make sure that coral reefs stay healthy, even if some of the coral turns into the beach.
And Jason, what's your ocean origins story?
Yeah. Well, first off, though, speaking of octopi, I guess, there's a great book. I think it's The Consciousness of an Octopus, or something like The Mind
The
of an
Soul of an Octopus.
Soul of an Octopus.
I read it. Yeah. It's great. One of my favorites.
It's a great book, and I don't think people realize how conscious these creatures are. They're incredibly, incredibly smart. And so it's a good book if you're one of those, like most of us land lovers, who kind of think of sentient beings as mostly terrestrial, and we think of sharks as kind of mindless killers, and fish as kind of, they don't feel pain and all this stuff. None of that is true. And if you really want to learn about a really highly sentient being, read about octopi. But on to my story. So mine is a little dark, but it has a good ending. Which is, so I'm going to date myself here. I grew up with, record players, and my parents had a record player, and they had songs of the humpback whale. And so I was probably your age, Charlie, 5, 6 or something, when you got inspired. And I would listen to this. You can imagine a 5 or 6-year-old listening to these haunting sounds of a humpback whale singing. And I just remember being totally mesmerized by it. And then in the insert of albums, they used to have kind of magazines, and they had a magazine of the humpback whale. And this one, unfortunately, was full of all the pictures of them being harpooned and killed. And they had very, very gory pictures of humpback whales being slaughtered and sea full of blood. And so here I was listening to this music, and, kids love whales, and then seeing that. And I think if I was really to trace my my conservation ocean loving past, is probably to that. And the picture behind me on the screen here is me swimming with humpback whales in Tonga. And so it finally came full circle, and I'm trying to protect them now after learning about them 40 plus years ago.
Okay, and I always loved the beach, and grew up on Long Island Sound, harassed my mom to take us to Jones Beach. And when I was 15, she took my sister and me down to the Florida Keys, and it felt like looking at that turquoise water. It was like coming home to a place I'd never been before. And until then, I always thought I was like generations too soon to, travel to alien worlds. Well, I got a mask and snorkel down there that week and got off the seawall, and there was like, colorful living rocks and shoaling fish and my first little hammerhead shark and a sea turtle. And I just realized there's this alien world just off our shore. And I've just been, spending my life trying to get to know a little of it. And, people say you're optimistic or pessimistic. With the state of the ocean, what we're doing with this Ocean Climate Action Plan is trying to grow the solutions and save what we can at this point. But I'm always most optimistic when I'm in the water, body surfing, diving, just that reconnection with the source.
And vote. Everybody vote.
For sure.
The most important thing in the next 6 months is vote.
Sea Party 2020. All the changes that we're talking about require a change of regime, a change of politics.
To all the adults out there, your voices are super important right now. And voting for the next generation is definitely the right choice and something that we need, especially right now.
And I'm going with Jason. You're the argument for the 16-year-old vote.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's Rising Tide for today. If you'd like to learn more about the Ocean Climate Action Plan, read the full report, or get involved yourself, go to bluefront.org or to the Center for the Blue Economy at Middlebury. If you like our podcast, help promote it to your friends and through your media. And of course, we'll see you again on the next tide, the Rising Tide.
Hi, my name's Elise Landon. I live on the beach in San Diego, and I'm the first listener to subscribe to Rising Tide. Special thanks to Blue Frontier, Studio K May, and Ocean Conservation Research for making Rising Tide possible.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free, the sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the Blue Frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the Blue Frontier.